the day, and what is your position on the ongoing House of Representatives impeachment inquiry into President Trump?
Yeah, let's just start by that, right off the bat.
Not that there's anything bigger going on.
Yeah, no, it's a big thing, obviously. Well, first off, let me preface that is that the House is going through those investigations, which is part of their constitutional duty, is to hold the executive accountable, and that's the process that they're going through. The Constitution is very clear that that's what the House needs to do. But I'll say, from my opinion, is that I got to wait to see whether or not you even have articles of impeachment. That's up to the House to decide. That's not for us in the Senate to decide. They're going through that process. Today it moves to the Judiciary Committee. Mostly the hearings have been in the Intel Committee. The Judiciary is going to have hearings. I think the hearing they're having tomorrow or the next day will be with a number of constitutional scholars talking about the impeachment process generally and how the Constitution laid that out, how our framers laid that out. And our framers took this, and it is an incredibly serious thing. It hasn't happened much in our history. But our founders were very concerned about an executive that would abuse power and would abuse that power to the detriment of the country and the republic. And it's no surprise that our framers were concerned about that. They had just fought the monarchy and the Revolutionary War, and were afraid of the executive powers that you would have with a monarch, especially a monarch that could just trample over the parliament that existed in Great Britain. And so they had this power to make sure that there would be held in check. And so I think that's what's going to be talked about and how that process should be looked at going forward. But should those articles of impeachment be drafted and come to the Senate, then we act as it's a trial. So we act as a jury. So if you're looking at a juror, I'm one of the jurors that will hear the case. There are 100 of us, and we have to during the trial, we all have to sit quietly at our desk. We can't talk. That's going to be really hard for a lot of 100 senators to sit there and not talk. There's no talking. It's only the counsel for the House and then for the White House. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over that process. It's a little different than a court, though, in the fact that even though we're jurors, we submit questions. We can't talk, but we can submit questions that go forward. The other thing that's different than a court case is that if the attorneys make a motion, some sort of procedural motion, the judges can rule on that, and whatever the judge says happens. In an impeachment trial in the Senate, we actually can vote to overrule the judge. And so we don't have that in a regular court, though the jury can do that, can overrule the judge that's presiding. So it's a different process. But that will go through, and we will make a decision based on the facts that are presented. And I want to highlight that, and I take this very seriously. This is really a solemn occasion to have an impeachment go forward. It's as serious as it can possibly get, and again, our framers put that forward to make sure that that's done in a serious way. And I'm going to keep an open mind all through this. I'm going to hear the facts as they're presented, and we'll hear the facts from the House, and then we'll hear what the White House has in terms of their case, their defense case, basically, that's presented for it. And I know people are looking at me like, Gary, how's that going to happen? We're in a hyper-partisan world and partisan politics, and I get all of that. But we have to rise above that. We've got to rise, all of us. I hope all 99 of my colleagues would rise above that and say, this cannot be about partisan politics. It is not worthy of that. We've got to show to the American people that this is a credible process, one of really goes to the core foundation of our democratic republic. And we have to make those decisions based on facts from both sides. And then once we make the vote, obviously we'll have to stand up, and I'll have to stand in front of a group like this, and I'll give the reasons why I voted one way or the other, and then I'll be held accountable for that. That's the way the system has to work. And I'm prepared to do that. I do that. There's been some folks that are saying, let's make it a secret vote for the Senate. I don't support that. There shouldn't be any secret. There has to be complete transparency for this. And I'm a senator. I have an obligation to be completely transparent and vote. You should know exactly how I voted. That should never be a question. You should hear my reasons for how I vote one way or the other, and then again make a decision or hold me accountable based on that. So it's going to be a formal vote that goes forward. Timing-wise, what we're hearing is that should the articles of impeachment be drafted, that probably will happen before Christmas time, and then it would go to the Senate. I don't know how long the trial would be in the Senate. That's still undetermined, whether or not how long it'll be. I've heard anywhere from 2 weeks to 8 weeks. I hope it's not 8 weeks, but hopefully it's shorter than that as we go forward. But I think it's important for us to continue to do our job. I mean, while this is going on, we've got to be focused on doing what's right for the people in Michigan. It's not in the Senate right now. You heard me say I passed legislation on border security, so we passed that bill. I have a bill before the Senate this week to help veterans with apprenticeship training to get the skills that they need. I passed legislation to help get more money for cleanup of the Great Lakes, which is critically important for us here in Michigan. So we still got to focus on doing our job for the American people. That has to be our number one focus. But you can't chew gum and walk at the same time, but you have to keep passing bills. And for the House's sake, the House has passed over 400 bills already, 400 bills. Unfortunately, our leader, Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, hasn't taken those bills up. And they've been kind of in limbo land. So the House is passing bills while doing their impeachment inquiry. And they're past 400 of them. We aren't anywhere near that in the Senate, so we should be stepping up our game. Sorry for that really long answer. It was a big question. So.
It was, no doubt. Let's go on to another subject. You recently met with local religious leaders to advance bipartisan legislation to provide more resources to provide security at houses of worship. What inspired this project and where does it stand?
Well, unfortunately, it's inspired because of the attacks that we've seen at houses of worship. And my work in the Homeland Security is protecting the homeland, is protecting our houses of worship like anything else. I am saddened beyond what we should be doing, that we have to actually provide resources for our houses of worship to protect themselves. If there's one place in this country that you should be able to go to and feel safe and not threatened, it should be where you worship, that place. But unfortunately, that's not the world we're in. And if you look at what has happened in this country, and in fact, we had a hearing on this on domestic terrorism in the Homeland Security Department, or committee, is that if you think of the terrorist attacks that have occurred in our country, they've been since 9/11, and 9/11, of course, is a horrific attack by a foreign terrorist. But most all the terrorist attacks since that time have been homegrown. They've been domestic, many of them fermented by white supremacist ideology, the insidious ideology of white supremacy. And many of the attacks we've seen on places of worship have been related to that in some way or another. So I'm working with Rob Portman, a Republican from Ohio, to increase the grants that are available. I just recently did a meeting, as you mentioned. We brought in faith leaders from all the faiths, came together to talk about their concerns, what they're hearing from their folks, and what sort of help that they need in order to safeguard and harden their places of worship. We're going to have $75 billion available in grants. Michigan has received some of those. Hopefully we'll be able to get a chunk of that, a good chunk of that, to help our places of worship, to protect them. And hopefully we'll get to a world where we don't need to do that, but that may take some time. But we're hoping to get that passed shortly and get resources into those places that are probably most at risk in our community. And you can imagine which places those are.
Are you able to anticipate when that vote might happen? Be this year or next year?
It'll be hopefully this year. Hopefully the department will be able to. Hopefully, well, it may run into next year, but as quickly as possible. We brought broad bipartisan coalition together. I don't know of any opposition to it. It's about getting it done as quickly as we can right now.
Very good. Another issue. One of the big issues that surfaced in the recent UAW strike against General Motors was the reduced need for traditional manufacturing workers with the expected transition to electric vehicles, which need fewer parts, and with automation. What types of workers does manufacturing industry of the future need, and what is being done to develop this needed workforce?
Well, that's a good question. That's a great question. And what do we have to be totally focused on? We talked a little bit about that earlier this morning too, is that the manufacturing will be changing. You'll see changes in manufacturing, but manufacturing as a whole, I think, can actually increase in this country, and that's going to be my focus. I'm going to go back to answer that. If you look at what's happening with artificial intelligence and machine learning and piloting cars and the self-driving automobiles, is that the same kind of things with AI to process all of the data that's coming in from these sensors can also be used on the shop floor. Our advanced manufacturing, Mike knows all about this, so he can speak eloquently about this, come on, is that we can capture a lot of data on the shop floor that's simply not being collected right now. It'll make it even more productive. And we can go to a place, and I believe this is why this National Institute of Manufacturing that I'm working on is so important, is that we should not think that we can't bring jobs back from China and Korea and other places. We can bring those jobs back. They're gonna look different than what the ones that we sent over, but we can bring them back. Workers are gonna have additional enhanced training opportunities to build from the skills that they currently have. But we can actually expand manufacturing in this country given what's happening from a technological standpoint. New technology is always scary, but it's also an incredible opportunity. But we have to lean into that opportunity and understand that this is an incredible opportunity for us to grow manufacturing in Michigan. But we've got to work with our local manufacturers. We also have to work with our educators. We've got folks from Livonia University and others that are working to how do we make sure that we are educating folks for those jobs in the future. But oftentimes those jobs don't require a 4-year degree. They're going to be skill training, certificate training. We've got to expand that dramatically. I've been working on legislation to do that. One piece that I just had passed was to make sure that our high school counselors aren't just talking about 4-year degree programs, as wonderful as they are. My friends here from Nevada, as wonderful as 4-year degree programs are, is that there are a lot of other opportunities for the 65% of our population who is not going to go on to get a 4-year degree. And they need to have a path and realize that there are incredible opportunities for them to get that. So this is going to take a kind of a rethinking of how we work together with educational institutions and our private companies to make sure that we have that workforce. But I'm very optimistic from it. I mentioned earlier in our town hall that we had earlier today is I'm not a robot apocalypse guy. You know, there are folks who believe the robots are going to take over and we're all going to be without jobs. I don't think that's going to happen. It's not going to happen at all. In fact, having people working with machines is incredibly powerful. The example that I give as to how humans are still a very important piece of the technological apparatus is that I use the example of chess. You're probably all familiar with the fact that computers have been able to beat chess masters for a number of years. This is not something new. It was a big news, whatever it was, over a decade ago. But you think the game of chess is pretty complicated, but a machine can just calculate all of the moves in a way that a human just can't do it. It's just a massive amount of mathematics or arithmetic involved. And so a machine can beat a chess master. So they go, well, machines are superior to humans. But what's really interesting is that an average chess player, somebody just like me, you know, plays every couple games, whatever, not a whole lot, pretty average chess player. You put an average chess player with a machine, and that combination can beat the machine that can beat the chess master. That's the power of humans working with machines and our ability to creatively think and problem solve and bring all that, to be able to bring that together. Those are the jobs of the future. You don't have to be experts in all those aspects. You have to know enough to understand how you use a machine to leverage what you know, but it's uniquely human skills that we have that we shouldn't be afraid of. We should say this is really a way for us to leverage even further where we can go. So that's how we'll deal with that problem. It's one that we have to be focused on, and we have to put it at the top of our agenda.
Another related manufacturing question, somebody was from the audience wanted to know, are there plans to reintroduce the Autonomous Vehicle START Act in the next Congress?
There is, yes. So for folks, this is legislation that I'm working on with Senator Thune, who's a Republican from South Dakota, bipartisan legislation. So the START Act is to help our companies develop the self-driving technologies of the future. And again, we're facing significant competition from Europeans and from Asian manufacturers. If we're not on this, we're going to lose this battle. When we lose this battle, it's about not only the auto industry, but it's machine learning, AI, all of those things that go with it. But the federal laws need to adapt, and we have to have them more flexible with this advancing technology. We all know that technology is moving at an exponential rate. And if you chart exponential, you know that keeps getting steeper and steeper, and And federal law works on a pretty constant rate. It's called the snail rate, which is like this. So if you got the snail rate and the exponential rate, that's a big gap there. That's a problem. So that's what our legislation is about, is how do we create more flexibility so we can keep up with that kind of change. And I say keep up because the cars that will be self-driving are going to look a lot different than the ones we have now. And so for example, under federal law, you are required, when you build a car, you are required to have a steering wheel. I think that's a pretty good regulation right now. I think that's pretty good, given we have humans involved, but there's always A through Z of that steering wheel. You're also required to have a brake pedal, brakes. I think that's really good, depending on the driver, so they need that more sometimes. But these cars won't have a brake pedal, they're not going to have a steering wheel, so you can't really put them on the road. You can't test them. You got to be able to collect all the data associated with it. So our legislation allows companies to start putting these cars on the road. They've got to check off a bunch of boxes. They've got to validate the technology. It's got to be on the test tracks. We got an amazing test facility here at the American Center for Mobility in Ypsilanti. We've got M-City with the University of Michigan. We're at the tip of the spear, so to speak, here in Michigan when it comes to advanced research for this in our test facilities. So you got to check all those boxes. Cybersecurity you've got to check, which is absolutely critical with a self-driving car. If there's a cyber attack on your bank account, you're really mad. If they've taken some money from you, and you should be mad. But if there's a cyber attack on the car that's driving you down the highway, that could be existential if it drives you into a wall. So we have to say cybersecurity has to be first and foremost. That has to be part of that process. So all that's integrated into my legislation. Having said that, this is a big change in the way the world works. We weren't able to get it through. We passed it out of committee last Congress. We weren't able to get it through the Senate. We're going to reintroduce it, though. We're now working in the House and the Senate, so we can do it in a coordinated way. We're hoping to introduce that soon. But I'll tell you, it's something our auto companies need, because they need to have the certainty as to what the regulation is. You can't develop this technology and not know what the regulatory framework is for you to go forward. So I've been working very closely with our friends at General Motors, Ford, FCA. They need this sooner rather than later, but we're going to do everything we can to try to accommodate.
All right, Senator, we have about 10 minutes left for questions. Just kind of another follow-up to what you just said. What types of changes do you see are needed in the education system as we adjust to artificial intelligence and what the future technology will bring?
Yeah, I guess I think I touched some of that, as you mentioned already, and that's kind of where that aspect. People should have an understanding of how this machine human interface, particularly with advanced computing. But you don't have to have advanced engineering degrees for this. You have to have people who just understand how those things work together and how you can think broadly in problem solving, which is different than some of our schools that are still kind of in a mode of the 20th century. You've got to change that in our schools, K through 12. But I tell you, I'm focused. I think a lot about this. I mean, to me, we have to be in a place where someone can come out of high school and can get a good job, a good paying middle-class job. We can do that. That doesn't mean they don't have more education. They're going to need more education. You're going to need education your whole life. We've got to be back to that process where you're constantly upgrading your skills on a regular basis. But we can do that, especially as we're bringing more manufacturing jobs from overseas back and working in these factories of tomorrow, which are going to not look anything like your dad's or granddad's factories. They don't look like that now when you go there, when you go to Alpha and other places. But they're going to change dramatically after that as well. But that's going to be a paradigm shift that we see in our education process. And it's really more about creative thinking skills, rather than learning a specific skill that may be outdated 2 years later, or shorter, depending on what's happening. But how do you adapt to that creative human skills? Back to that example of the average chess player. It's an average chess player who can beat a chess master when teamed with a machine, and can beat the machine that can beat the chess master. That's the power of this. We've got to educate for that kind of system.
All right, moving to healthcare now. As part of the Affordable Care Act, there was a health insurance tax that was suspended in 2019, and it'll go into effect in 2020 unless it is suspended. Will you vote to end or to suspend the health insurance tax for next year?
Is that the Cadillac tax you're referring to?
It was like $500 per company towards health insurance.
The mandate.
Yeah, the mandate.
Yeah, the mandate. Well, unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act has been under pretty regular attack by the current administration. and we have to strengthen it. I tell you, I believe that everybody in this country, no matter who you are, no matter where you live, should have access to quality, affordable health care. We have to say that that's got to be our focus. And the frustration that I have right now is that you have people who say, just keep the Affordable Care Act like it is, or we got to throw it completely out. Neither one of those is the answers. We've got to come together and find common ground to accomplish that goal, that everybody in this country has access to quality, affordable health care. And that means we've got to keep things like pre-existing conditions. Unfortunately, we've got a lawsuit that the Trump administration has now that will throw all that out, where people even with a pre-existing condition may not be able to get the health care they need. I think that's wrong. That you have, and it's probably the most popular part of the Affordable Care Act, is that if you're sick and you have a pre-existing condition, or you're laid off from work, or whatever happens, and then you're out of insurance, you should still be able to get quality, affordable health care. All of these pieces that you're mentioning, they all fit together. It's hard to, everybody wants to break them up into different pieces and say, are you for this piece or that piece? The problem is, if you get rid of this piece doesn't work. No one wants to talk about that we've got all these pieces in a very complex healthcare system, and you got to look at it in a comprehensive way. The problem with this debate is that we're not doing that, and we got to get past this ideology that this is all bad and go back to common sense. One area that I'm particularly focused, and here is the chamber, that I want to fix in the Affordable Care Act is we have to make it easier for small businesses to be able to provide health care for their employees. Bottom line, has to happen. And the Affordable Care Act doesn't necessarily do that. There were tax credits, there were mechanisms put in place to help a small business to be able to afford health care for your employees. Most of the folks who don't have health care, they work at a small business because small business can't afford it. We got to zero in on that problem. And the healthcare, the ACA had credits for small businesses, but it was not workable. It didn't work very well. We can fix that. That's something that we should be able to fix. So we should come together as Democrats and Republicans. You know, I take great pride in working in a bipartisan way. Georgetown University ranks all of us on bipartisanship. I'm proud to say I'm ranked one of the most bipartisan senators in the Senate, because I think that's really how we solve these problems, is come together. And healthcare's got to be front and center on that. There's way too much ideology. There's too much siloed thinking on this. And I'm committed. My commitment to you is I'm going to do everything I can to bring folks together to think about this in a comprehensive way, but understand our biggest challenge are small business owners.
All right, last question we have for you. You have a number of your colleagues in the U.S. Senate running for president this time. Any observations you have on that campaign so far, and have you made any endorsements yet for next year?
Well, you mentioned my colleagues. I think about half of my caucus is running for president right now. So my official answer is I love all of my colleagues for the Senate. My view is that maybe one of them won't come back to the Senate. All the others are. So they're all my friends. I'm going to have to work with them as we go forward in the years ahead. So I have not endorsed. Obviously, we have a lot of candidates out there. I would like the list to get a little smaller. Having all these candidates, I don't think is great at this point, although it's wonderful to have a lot of candidates. The Democratic Party is a big tent party. We'd love to have a lot of debate and discussion, but it's getting to the time where we have to get smaller. But apparently we're actually adding candidates at the same time we're losing candidates, so it's kind of a complicated time that we're in right now. But my view is that whoever the Democratic nominee is, they just have to win Michigan. That's what I'm focused on. They have to be able to win here in Michigan and resonate. Some candidates, to be serious to your question, some candidates we know have the ability to do that. Those who have represented Midwestern states and those who have campaigned here. That doesn't mean the others can't, but we got to see them in our state. We got to see them campaigning and see how they're connecting with folks in Michigan. Because we can be frank about this, and this is going to be next year is going to be really wild here in Michigan. I think it's safe to say a Democrat or Republican cannot win the presidency if they lose Michigan. It goes to both sides. Now, it's not a sufficient condition, but it's necessary. So we're like in the center of the political universe, without question. You're going to see an awful lot of activity here from the presidential campaigns. A little bit of business advice: if you want to buy a TV station, buy it now. This would be a really good time to buy TV stations, because there'll be a lot of commercials that are going to be put on TV next year because of being in the center of all of that. And it's probably going to come down to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan once again for the presidential race. So So we got to have candidates who obviously do well here. And I've been encouraging all of the candidates to come and spend time in Michigan as much as they can, because you just can't show up, you can't parachute right before an election. You've got to earn the respect and support of people in the state by showing up early and showing up often. And I'm encouraging all candidates to do that before I make a decision.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks, Senator Peters, for being here today.